Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Radiant Central, and I'm your host Natasha St. Michael, and thank you so much for joining me. So I received a few emails regarding Irritable Bowel Syndrome, or IBS, and bloating, and quite a few people have been asking me what they can do beyond just food combining, because they've tried the food combining and they're still having issues. And as most people know, I'm a health coach, and I work with people with their diets, and I've worked with a lot of people with irritable bowel syndrome. And one thing I can definitely say is that it is something you can definitely reverse. It takes some commitment and time and patience and even I would say perseverance, because it's a matter of working with your diet and figuring out what are those trigger foods, what are the foods that your body is sensitive to, and what are the foods that your body might not be able to process properly, and therefore it's causing digestive issues and havoc within your system. So it is something that if you really give it your all and try different things out, it is something that you can definitely reverse over time. And I have to also say that I've seen many people be able later on, once their digestive system is much stronger, they're able to reintroduce some of the foods that they needed initially to eliminate. So that's a good thing as well. So beyond food combining, because I do have to agree with people that have complained to me saying that food combining doesn't really help so much, or it's not giving them the results that they're looking for, I have to also agree that there are things beyond food combining that people need to look into, especially with irritable bowel syndrome. If it's just issues with sometimes getting gas once in a while or something like that, then yeah, food combining can help. But I find if it's a chronic issue of gas, bloating, and either constipation or chronic diarrhea, that it's more than just food combining. It's certain foods that are causing issues. So just for those that don't know what food combining is, it's a few rules out there with how to combine certain foods. And for example, fruit. With food combining, the view is that fruit should be eaten on its own. It shouldn't be combined with any other food in a meal. The only exception would be green leafy vegetables, like making a smoothie with spinach or kale or something, or having a salad and throwing some fruit in there. That's the only exception. But with food combining, the view is that fruit should be its own meal in itself, or it should be in the beginning of the meal, but never at the end, because it's much quicker to digest fruit than it is other proteins, fats, and starches. Another rule with food combining is not to mix starches with proteins and fats. So not to mix starches like flour or bread or pasta or potatoes or whole grains, not to mix those with proteins and fats. And the proteins and fats would be animal meats or eggs or cheese or fish or things like that, nuts and seeds. Not to mix the two, the starches with the proteins and fats, but to eat them separately with your meals. So if you're going to have a pasta, you would have pasta on its own, but you wouldn't be throwing in meat in there. You wouldn't have cheese with it. If you're having bread, you wouldn't be having bread with meat or with nuts, but you would have it just on its own. So, and for some people with digestive issues, doing that helps. Other people, they need to be doing a little bit more than just that. So I'm going to kind of go through the different food groups and give some suggestions with them as to what maybe to take a break from or eliminate, and what to decrease, and how to eat it where it can actually be easier to digest. So starting with fruit, I do agree with food combining that fruit is best if you have irritable bowel syndrome and issues with bloating and diarrhea and gas and constipation, things like that, that it is better to eat fruit on its own, and especially in the beginning of a meal, but never at the end, okay, if you have a weak digestive system. But I would actually take it a step further, that if someone feels that fruit might be a contributing factor, I would suggest either having fruit in the beginning of the day and not at all afterwards. Like, fruit should just be eaten on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, and that's it. And to only be having 1 or 2 fruits, not to be having like a huge fruit salad with 6 different fruits, or not to be having a smoothie with 5 different fruits, but really just to stick with 1 or 2 fruits. So if you're having a smoothie, it would be like a banana and some berries, or if you're having a fruit salad, just to have a fruit salad of peaches, or just have cut up apples, but just to stick with 1 or 2 fruits and not to be combining too many different fruits with it. That can help. And having it just on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, and for the rest of the day eat other foods. For a lot of people this helps. If you suspect it's more than that, but it's still with fruits, my suggestion too would be to stick more with lower glycemic fruits like apples or pears or just berries. A lot of times people have a sensitivity to fruit sugars, and if they're eating a lot of tropical fruits, that can trigger that sensitivity, whereas if they have lower glycemic fruits and locally grown fruits, that they do much better with that. So that's something to try out too. And if you really feel like it's a serious like fruit sugar issue or just a fruit issue, take a break from fruit. You know, it doesn't mean you're taking a break from it for the rest of your life, but maybe do a few weeks and see, you know, what happens to your body if you don't have any fruit. You know, it doesn't mean you're taking out all produce. Just cut out the fruit and have more vegetables and see if that can actually help, if that you feel is an issue. Okay, so that's with the fruit. The next suggestion I have would be with the next food group would be with grains, whole grains. I get a lot of questions with this, that people are separating the whole grains from proteins and fats and they're still having problems digesting it. And I find in general is that whole grains are very difficult to digest. And if someone has a weak digestive system and they're dealing with irritable bowel syndrome, eating whole grains, no matter how healthy the whole grain is, and no matter if they're eating it like a bowl of quinoa on its own or a bowl of millet on its own, they're still running into problems. I see this over and over again, and I find one of the easiest ways of getting rid of irritable bowel syndrome is actually to take a break from whole grains completely. And that means taking a break from quinoa or buckwheat or brown rice, things like that. I do find out of all the whole grains, the few grains that people are able to digest that don't cause so many issues or any issues at all are oats. I find a lot of people do okay having oatmeal, just plain oatmeal, no fruit or anything thrown in there, but just plain, or toasted oats, or having with rice and having basmati rice or jasmine rice, not brown rice. I find a lot of times people have a hard time digesting brown rice. If you have irritable bowel syndrome and difficult time digesting things, whole grains are difficult to digest, but you can try and see if basmati rice or jasmine rice or oats, if you can digest those. If not, just take a break from the whole grains and see how things go. It might just be that. The next food group that people have an issue with is legumes and beans, pulses, things like that. Sometimes it's very difficult to digest, or sometimes it's just the skins on it. Like if someone has chickpeas, it might just be the outer skin on the chickpea that is difficult to digest. So if you do like to have beans and pulses in your diet, I suggest removing the skins from it. And that just means cooking it maybe a little bit longer and sitting down and removing the skins. A lot of times they come off in the cooking process, or you have to manually do it. But for some people, just doing that one extra step can make it much easier to digest these things. I also find in general that it's with having beans and legumes, rather than having like a bowl of beans, I find people digest it much better if they just have a small handful and they throw it into a salad, or they eat it with other vegetables. And I find in general that having large volumes of beans and legumes in a dish is difficult to digest. And if you have a smaller amount with other foods like salad greens or some vegetables, easier to digest because you're having a smaller amount, so you're still getting full from it, and you're having other foods that can help sort of sweep it through your system. The next one is nuts and seeds. A lot of people have a hard time digesting these as well, and you can soak them. I find that for some people, soaking nuts and seeds overnight, you just rinse them off, put them in some water, and leave them at room temperature covered in water for 8 to 12 hours, and then drain them, rinse them off, and eat them as is. Some people do very well with that. Some people they soak the nuts and seeds and they still have issues. If that's the case, sometimes like something like almonds, you can try taking off the skin. A lot of times people do better if they remove the skin, and you can either do that from soaking the almonds, or you can blanch the almonds and then peel off the skin. Try that out. I find in general when it comes down to nuts, almonds and cashews to be the most difficult for people to digest. And the one nut that I find easiest for people to digest is pine nuts. And everything else, it's kind of some people do well with, some people don't. And one thing I do suggest is if you don't do well with one nut or one type of seed, don't rule off everything else. Try something else, because sometimes it's just one or two different types of nuts and seeds that you don't do well with, but other ones are fine. I find in general too that sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds, people can digest much easier than they can nuts. So that's something to try out too, and try soaking the pumpkin seeds or the sunflower seeds. Also, when you're eating nuts and seeds, really important to chew them down, especially when you have irritable bowel syndrome, because a lot of times people throw nuts and seeds into their mouth and they chew 1 or 2 times and they just kind of break it up and then they swallow it. And of course it's going to be hard to digest. And when you have irritable bowel syndrome, your digestive system is not super strong to be digesting big pieces of nuts. It needs you to pre-digest the food in your mouth. So that means chewing things, chewing your nuts and seeds down to like a paste and then swallowing it. Much, much easier on your digestion. Okay, so that's something too to try out. Now, I've gone through all these different foods, and some of them might think to themselves, okay, well, what is left? The one thing that I can say that I find to be pretty benign and pretty easy for people to digest, especially those with irritable bowel syndrome, is root vegetables like potatoes. And even a lot of people do well with eating pumpkin, sweet potato, squash, things like that. And so if you decide to do an experiment where you're going to just cut out the whole grains and do that for a few weeks, my suggestion is to replace it with eating potatoes and sweet potatoes and pumpkin and squash, things like that. Try that out. You might want to try just having potatoes for a while, and then if that goes well, then add in the sweet potatoes and then add in the pumpkin and try different things out, because I find those are very easy to digest, and sometimes people do well eating all the root vegetables, whereas other people, they do really well eating potatoes and pumpkin, but they have a hard time digesting yams or squash, so, and sometimes it's the reverse. They do well with squash, but nothing else. So try these different ones out, because I do find those foods to be pretty benign, and it's a great substitute for other carbohydrates that are harder to digest. And then also too, what I suggest is trying to simplify your meals. Really, really, really important with irritable bowel syndrome is that the less ingredients you have in your meals, the better. So sometimes when you're making a salad, instead of using 10 ingredients, use 3. When you're making a smoothie, use 2 or 3 ingredients, not 5. And especially with a smoothie, I don't suggest using almond milk and 3 different fruits and a handful of greens and then protein powder and nut butter and all of that thrown into the blender. When you have irritable bowel syndrome, you don't need to be having so many ingredients. You need to be just keeping things very, very simple. And I would suggest, if you're making a smoothie, just have a little bit of fruit and green leafy vegetable in there and maybe some water, but don't be throwing in the almond milk and the protein powder and all of that, because I just find that creates a lot of digestive distress for someone that has a weak digestive system, and better to be separating these things. So keeping the meals simple. Same thing when you're having your actual dinner or your lunch or your breakfast, to keep those meals simple. Stick with having steamed vegetables or baked vegetables, and if you eat meat or fish, having that, and just keeping things very, very simple. Having a salad with it. Sometimes people don't do so well having raw vegetables. They're much better off having steamed or baked vegetables. And if that's the case, follow that, and if that isn't the case, then combine the two. Have salads and also have some of the steamed stuff as well. One last thing too that I can suggest is having pureed foods. So having pureed soups, or having smoothies, or having pureed dips. I find a lot of times that helps people, but at the same time, remember to keep the ingredients simple. So if you're having a pureed soup, don't have 20 different vegetables in that soup. Just stick with pureeing, maybe having a fresh homemade broth with pureeing some cauliflower or potato or something in there. And I find that too helps, because a lot of times the blended or pureed food, it's pre-digested, and so it's easier just for the body to process it. So main thing is keep things simple and keep things easy to digest. The last thing too that I would recommend is spacing out your meals. Instead of grazing or eating every 2 hours, try having larger meals 3 times a day and no snacks in between. Give your body time to digest things. Super, super important, because sometimes if you're eating all day long, your digestive system is always breaking stuff down and working on things. And if you have irritable bowel syndrome, your digestive system's a little bit weak. So it just needs to deal with a little bit at a time and have some time to rest in between. And try not to eat so late at night either, to allow your body to kind of do a mini fast overnight so that it can help to get strong again and to digest food better again. All right, so those are my suggestions. If someone is interested in doing one-on-one coaching, I do still offer that. You can go to my website at radiantcentral.com and click on coaching, and there's more information on the coaching I offer. And also just to remind everyone that the next 7-Day Raw Food Challenge, it starts next week, next Monday, May 26th. It's 7 days of doing a raw food cleanse. It's super fun. It's a group effort. It's a group online program, so you can do it from anywhere around the world. Once you sign up, you get the recipes and the shopping list and everything to prepare yourself for doing the 7-Day Raw Food Challenge. And then during the challenge, there's daily videos created to walk you through the cleanse and everything you need to know about the raw food diet. And there's an online forum where you can connect with everyone doing it with you. I'm on the forum every day answering questions, and it's a lot of fun. And it's a perfect time of the year. It's May. It's right before the summer, so perfect time of the year to do a cleanse, and you can still eat and enjoy healthy raw foods and learn how to make healthy, wholesome, wonderful foods. So if you're interested in joining, go to my website at radiantcentral.com, click on products, and there's more information there. It starts next Monday, May 26th. Have a super fabulous day, everyone, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.